I don't know what it was at first, just a pulse, a thin whisper between the static of deep space channels. You don't hear it unless you're listening for what shouldn't be there. And I was. That night, or whatever you call it when you're floating 22 light years from the nearest sun, I was scanning band Gamma 77, dead air, normally. But there it was. A 3-second frequency burst, then silence. Not mechanical, not random, and not ours. We've been parked in orbit around Zeta Helix 4 for 9 cycles now, an artificial moon locked into decay around a lifeless gas giant. No surface anomalies, no internal energies, just a still carcass older than any known civilization. And yet, every few years, some idiot signs up to explore it. This year, that idiot is me. My assignment was observational. Simple. Map the lower decks, tag abandoned systems, and return. But none of that matters now. Because I heard something. Something inside. The crew doesn't talk much anymore. Jensen sleeps with a knife under his pillow. Molly checks the bulkhead seals every 2 hours like clockwork. I think he's hoping they're broken, that maybe we'll all get spaced before this goes any deeper. Me? I just listen. I sit with my headphones tuned to the dark, and I wait for the static to move. And tonight, it did. Not once, 5 times. Same burst, same modulation. And this time, I recorded it. Ran it through the old pre-collapse linguistics filters, just to be sure. The translation protocol hesitated, then printed one word across my cracked screen in flickering blue pixels. Remember. I stared at it until the letters bled into the screen. What the hell does that mean? Remember what? There are no life signs on the station, no known transmissions, no atmosphere, even. It's dead. It's been dead longer than Earth's had pyramids. And yet, the signal came from inside it. Chamber 7, to be precise. A section of the base that doesn't exist on any of the official schematics. We called it a glitch, a corrupted section. But now, I'm not so sure. I played the signal back for Jensen. His face went pale. He didn't say a word, just stood up and locked the medbay door behind him. Molly refused to listen. He said it sounded too human. Said it's a trick, something built to sound like us. Something that remembers us, even if we've forgotten it. Maybe that's what the word means. Maybe it's not a message. Maybe it's a command. I don't sleep much anymore. The lights flicker even when there's full power. The walls creak like they're breathing. And in the silence, between the hum of recycled air and the distant groans of alien metal, I hear it. That voice. It doesn't speak in words. It doesn't need to. It speaks in the memory of things we were never meant to know. Ancient grief, echoes of extinction, the quiet scream of a race long turned to dust. It doesn't want to be alone anymore. And now, it knows we're here. We found the source of the signal, Chamber 7, a sealed hatch embedded in what we thought was a maintenance wall. We never saw it before, not even on LiDAR, and yet, there it is, waiting, cold, unlit, unmapped. Tomorrow, we open it. There's something unnatural about a door that waits for you. Not just locked, not just hidden, waiting. Like, it was always meant to be found, but only when the right kind of mind came looking. That's what Chamber 7 feels like. The hatch isn't marked, not numbered, not even powered. Just a slab of perfectly smooth black alloy sealed into the corridor wall flush. Silent, unyielding. And yet, this morning, as we approached with scanners and plasma torches, it slid open. No sound, no air pressure release, no motion sensors, just a clean vertical split, a hissless divide, and then nothing darkness swallowing the beam of our lights like it was hungry. Jensen was the first to step through. He didn't hesitate, didn't ask permission. He just stared at the open passage and walked forward like he had to, as if something inside had already spoken to him. He didn't speak a word as we followed, not even when the hatch closed behind us. We thought we were descending. The architecture was wrong-winding spirals that looped in impossible angles, corridors that curved upward but felt like downward slopes. The air was breathable, even though no life support systems registered. Gravity held steady, but in ways that didn't match the rest of the station. It felt as though space had been folded, herocreased by something that understood our dimensions only enough to trap us inside them. Molly kept checking his motion tracker. It showed we weren't moving at all. He shook it, swore under his breath, then finally gave up and smashed it against the wall. He hasn't said much since. Just stares at the walls, eyes wide like he's trying to see through them. Maybe he already does. The corridors led us to what looked like a control chamber or maybe a memory vault. It's hard to describe. The walls were covered in glyphs, shifting fractals of light and shadow that changed when you looked directly at them. Like the symbols knew they were being seen, like they wanted to be misread. I reached out to touch one, just one, and I felt cold, not in my skin, in my thoughts, like a memory had been stolen and replaced before I even knew it was gone. For a second, I forgot where I was, who I was, only for a second. But it was enough. That's when the whispers began. Not voices, not really, more like thoughts that didn't belong to me, bleeding into my mind like a leaky faucet. Ancient memories, crusted with time and alien grief, a city burning in starlight, creatures watching from the void. Screams translated through aeons into sensations I could barely hold on to. We should have left then, but something in that place holds you. It cradles your fear, feeds it, and when you try to resist, it soothes you not with comfort, but with familiarity, as if the horror itself had been tailored to fit your mind, perfectly shaped to feel like destiny. Jensen walked to the center of the room and placed his hand on the floor. It pulsed red beneath him, just once, like a heartbeat, and then the symbols stopped moving. Everything froze. The room fell silent. Then, a voice. No speakers, no source. Just inside us, all at once. It didn't speak in any known tongue, but we understood. You came late. That was all. Just 2 words, but it shattered us. Molly dropped to his knees, screaming. Jensen didn't move. I stood frozen, my lungs refusing to fill, because that voice, it was mine. It spoke in my exact tone, with my exact rhythm, as if I'd said it, but from some other time. Something in Chamber 7 remembers us. Something older than the stars, older than thought, and it has waited. Not for rescue, not for worship, but for recognition. We're not explorers anymore. We're pieces. I used to think that fear was a reaction, a reflex, a function of survival, but now I know it's something else entirely. Fear is a language. And whatever lives inside Chamber 7, whatever intelligence built this hollow monument in orbit around nothing, it speaks that language with perfect fluency. It doesn't roar, it doesn't chase, it doesn't even breathe. It simply waits for you to understand what you were never meant to comprehend. After the voice spoke, Jensen didn't move for hours. He sat in the center of the room like a statue carved from ash. His eyes never blinked. His lips moved in tiny, flickering, shapes-mouthing syllables I couldn't hear. Molly was gone. Physically, he was with us, crouched in the corner, clutching his head, but mentally, lost. He muttered numbers, prime sequences, coordinates, some real, some fabricated, some that don't exist in Euclidean space. And me? I stood perfectly still because I was afraid that if I moved, the room would remember me again. You think of memories as yours, but this place, treats your past like a catalog. It reaches in with invisible fingers and turns your life over like pages, childhood memories. People I'd long forgotten, the face of my brother, the weight of my mother's hand when she said goodbye before I left Earth. Not imagined reconstructed. They were too precise, too full of texture and temperature. They weren't illusions, they were retrieved. Something was studying me. Not my body, not my blood, my timeline, my causality. The glyphs on the walls began to pulse again, but now they weren't shifting. They were copying. One by one, each glowing fractal resolved into human language. Not English, not even a translation. Just thought patterns written in geometric logic, identical to what our minds produce when we recall memories, not what we remember, but how we remember. And that's when I realized something horrifying. This room wasn't a prison. It wasn't even a chamber. It was a neural emulator, a device, a space folded in on itself, designed to house the living thoughts of something long dead or worse, something that never lived as we understand it. And we were the seeds, the final components. We weren't meant to find this place. We were meant to complete it. Jensen stood suddenly. His eyes glowed not literally, but with something deeper, recognition. He smiled, that dead, slow, awful smile that looks like it belongs on a corpse trying to remember joy. He turned to me and said, "It knows our shape now." Then the wall behind him opened. No door, no hatch, just an unraveling of space, like cloth being torn off a mirror that didn't reflect light anymore. Beyond it was a corridor not black, not dark, but white. Endless white, but not clean or pure. Sterile, hollow, like the inside of a skull bleached by forgotten suns. Jansen walked through. I didn't stop him. Because the second he crossed that threshold, the entire structure sighed. The lights dimmed, then bloomed into life, as if something dormant had finally received what it needed. And I swear, for a fraction of a second, the station felt relieved.
Mally whispered a word then. A word I didn't know he knew. Ancient, wet, guttural. It came from his throat like a growl choked on tears. Xorthelin. I asked him what it meant. He didn't answer. Just turned his face to me. Eyes hollowed, pupils fractured into hexagonal spirals. It's waking up, he said. And now it knows your name too. My name. Not rank. Not call sign. My real name. The one I'd buried a lifetime ago. The one no one in this crew even knew. The one I hadn't spoken aloud since my first departure from Seoul. I didn't say it, but somehow Chamber 7 had it. That's when I knew memory was never ours. It only rented space in our minds until something older came to collect. And now the debt is due. There is a silence that isn't made of absence, but of weight. Not quiet, but pressure. It's the kind of silence that feels like it's leaning on you, watching you breathe. That's what it felt like when I stepped into the corridor of white. Not a hallway, not a tunnel, just a place where the edges of reality had been scraped off and replaced with something that only resembled space. The walls didn't reflect. They absorbed, not light intention. And every step forward made my memories grow quieter. It didn't take long before I couldn't remember why I was there. I walked. That's all I did. No clocks. No voice in my ear. No readings. Just the ache of thought growing heavier with each meter. I remembered Mally once, only once, his face flickering in the corner of my mind like an old broadcast. He was screaming. Or maybe praying. Then even that faded. Jensen was ahead of me. Not walking. Drifting. He didn't float, but he wasn't using his feet either. It's hard to explain. His movement was real, but not caused. Like he was being pulled by a memory of momentum. And he was smiling again. Wider now. The muscles of his face stretched into something human, but no longer alive. He said my name. My real one. Not over comms. Not out loud. I felt it. Like a whisper placed directly behind the eyes. And it echoed not through the corridor, but through my own personal history. I remembered myself at 6, holding a telescope. At 12, reading about alien transmissions. At 29, volunteering for this expedition. And in all of those memories, Jensen was there. Not as he is now. Not even as he was. Just there. A figure in the background. A voice at the edge of comprehension. Sometimes a teacher. Sometimes a stranger. Sometimes just a blur. I thought I was hallucinating. I prayed I was. Until I realized something that made my stomach freeze solid. Those weren't memories. Not truly. They were reconstructions. Fabricated recollections stitched into my mind with perfect detail. Inserted into my timeline like invasive species. I had never looked through that telescope. I had never spoken those words. Jensen was never there. But now the memory existed. And in this corridor, memory and reality had no border. I turned around. I shouldn't have. Behind me, the corridor was gone. Replaced with a vast, open chamber, black now, not white. A void filled with hovering glyphs that pulsed in rhythms too intricate for human math. Shapes that shouldn't exist in three-dimensional space. And in the middle of them floated Mally. Or what was left of him. His body hung suspended, limbs spread but limp, eyes wide open and unblinking. The glyphs hovered around him like orbiting moons, imprinting symbols onto his skin that sank below the surface like thoughts entering a mind. He didn't scream. That was the worst part. No agony. No fight. Just a slack-jawed emptiness, like his mind had been hollowed out and filled with something colder. Then I saw them. Shapes within the darkness. Not creatures. Not even beings. Forms. Like the idea of life filtered through the lens of something that had only observed existence from the outside. They moved like flickers in forgotten dreams. They had no eyes, but I could feel them watching. One of them stepped forward. No legs. No mouth. But I heard it speak. You were not the first. The voice wasn't sound. It was memory fed into my mind through every scar I'd ever had. Every old wound opened not in pain, but as a channel. A language of trauma. It spoke through everything I had ever suffered. You were not the last. I asked it what it wanted. Not with words, but with thought. Desperate, primal thought. The kind that rises when the mind starts drowning in the unknown. It replied, "We are collecting echoes. You call them souls. They are not yours." Then Jensen turned to face me. And for the first time since entering Chamber 7, I realized that wasn't Jensen anymore. It wore his face like it had been studying the folds of his skin for centuries. Not mimicking, inhabiting. Each twitch of Jensen's mouth, each blink, each slow tilt of the head, it all felt like a performance given by something that understood humanity only through autopsy. It wasn't him. I knew it the second I saw those eyes. They weren't dead. That would have been a mercy. They were rehearsed. Like they were learning how to wear grief, how to wrap it around words like a costume made from the bones of memory. He stepped forward and I stepped back. "Why are you afraid?" it asked, using Jensen's voice. But even then, it wasn't right. The cadence was slightly off, the inflection too precise. Like a machine reading a eulogy in a dialect it hadn't quite mastered. I asked it where Jensen was. It smiled. Jensen was necessary. He was a path, not a person. The chamber around us began to change again. Walls rising, falling, reshaping like liquid folding around invisible architecture. There were windows now, though they showed nothing but static. Not visual static. Temporal. Shards of time fluttering like broken glass in zero gravity. Scenes playing out inside them. A girl crying on a red shoreline. A child trapped beneath shattered concrete. A woman standing alone on a frozen balcony, staring into a void that blinked. They were my memories. And they weren't in my control anymore. "You gave them willingly," the imitation said. "Each pain. Each regret. They are the keys to the archive." I shouted at it. I screamed that these were mine, that no one had permission to take them. That they were private. And it laughed. No sound. Just the sensation of laughter. Like the walls around me exhaled mockery. Like my own heartbeat stuttered into a rhythm of ridicule. "There is no ownership of memory," it said. "Only access. You remember because the pattern allows it. But the pattern belongs to us." I dropped to my knees then. Not from pain. From disassembly. That's the only word that fits. It felt like my identity, my entire sense of I am, was being unpacked. Like a bag turned inside out. Like every story I'd ever told myself about who I was, wasn't mine. I saw Jensen then. The real one. Just for a flicker. Suspended in a chrysalis of liquid thought behind one of the shifting walls. His mouth was open, breathless. His body twitching in microscopic spasms like he was still dreaming something terrible. And I realized the truth. Jensen hadn't been taken. He'd surrendered. Voluntarily. Because Chamber 7 doesn't force you. It invites you. It finds the cracks in your sense of self, the little voids where guilt or grief fester, and it offers you peace. Not comfort. Peace. A silence so absolute it feels like the answer to pain. That's what it had offered me too. But I said no. And for the first time, the imitation frowned. "You resist," it said, voice now layered with thousands of tones, some human, some not. "You do not accept your place. This is inefficient." I stood. Even though I could barely breathe. Even though I didn't know if I was still real. I stood. "Good," it said. Conflict sharpens the signal. Resistance creates clarity. And then the chamber peeled open like a wound in reality, revealing a structure beyond it. Something that pulsed at the center of this base. It wasn't machinery. It wasn't organic. It was awareness, wrapped in impossible design. Like a brain sculpted from collapsed stars. And it was waking up. "You are not the first," it repeated, now not from one voice, but from the walls, the floor, my own thoughts. "You are not the last." Because Chamber 7 isn't a station. It's a seed. And Earth is its next soil. The idea that Earth was ever isolated was always an illusion. A comforting one, wrapped in the arrogance of distance. We believed that space was our shield, that light years meant safety. But now I know, the stars weren't barriers. They were breadcrumbs. And we weren't watching the void. It was watching us, waiting for the right moment to reach back. Chamber 7 was never a destination. It was a direction. And Earth all along was the endpoint. When the central structure revealed itself, I felt it before I saw it. Not with eyes. With history. Like a wave of déjà vu so deep it didn't just echo through my mind, it rewrote it. For one terrible moment I remembered dying. Over and over. As different people. On different planets. across different lifetimes. And in every death, the same shape watched from the horizon, the consciousness at the center of Chamber 7. It has no name, only function. It is not a god. It is not alive. It is what remains when civilizations end and their memories are compressed into raw awareness. A vault of extinction. A library of last thoughts. And we, in our curiosity, gave it exactly what it needed to grow. Mally was gone. His body dissolved into a smear of biological memory, slowly absorbed into the walls. I think he smiled before it happened. Like he understood something I didn't. Maybe surrender does feel like understanding when the pain is finally silenced. But I couldn't give it that. I turned back, thinking I could leave. That maybe the door still existed, that maybe this wasn't too deep, too late, too final. But space doesn't obey direction in this place. The chamber bends causality. I stepped backward and found myself walking forward into another room. One I'd never seen but somehow recognized. It was my childhood bedroom. Not a simulation. Not a memory. An import. Reconstructed in exact atomic detail. The cracks in the ceiling. The frayed corner of the carpet. The glow-in-the-dark stars I stuck on the wall when I was 8. And sitting on the bed was my mother. She looked up. She smiled. She opened her arms. I didn't move, because my mother had been dead for 17 years. And I knew, deep down in the marrow of my soul, that this wasn't her. It was a shape, a mimicry made from memory fragments I'd forgotten I even had. But the illusion was perfect. The cadence of her voice, the perfume I hadn't smelled in decades, the warmth in her eyes, just fractured enough to feel real. "It's not a trap," she said. "It's an offering." I wanted to believe her. Wanted to crawl into her arms and close my eyes and forget the cold hum of space and the static scream of truth. I almost did. Then I saw it. Just behind her, through the cracks in the memory, something watching. A ripple. A shadow. A thing too large for form, stretching through the walls of time like a parasite waiting for the host to dream. I stepped back. And her voice changed. Not in sound, in intent. The words stayed soft, but the need behind them grew sharp. She begged. She pleaded. And then she ordered. Her eyes twitched. Her hands trembled. The room around us began to decay, the illusion faltering like an old film reel running backwards through a fire. "You cannot leave," the thing behind her whispered. "You've been written in." The walls melted. The bed collapsed into rust. My mother's face fragmented into frames of memory, each one screaming, laughing, dying. And behind it all, the central structure pulsed once more. I understood then. Earth wasn't the destination because of distance. It was the destination because it had the signal. The thoughts. The guilt. The grief. The echoes. Everything Chamber 7 needed to complete itself already existed in billions of minds back home. The signal was only ever bait. We weren't explorers. We were the transmission. What is a transmission, really? Not a sound. Not a beam of light. It's a signature, a repeatable pattern in the chaos, something carved into entropy that says, "I was here." That's all we ever were to Chamber 7. Not souls. Not guests. Just a pattern dense enough to carry the seed. We called it exploration. We dressed it in science, diplomacy, wonder. But the truth is colder. We were infected long before we arrived. The thing in the walls, it doesn't move. It shifts. Like language rearranging itself into a scream. It isn't a being in the way we understand being. It's a compilation. An accumulation of civilizations that broadcast too loudly into the dark. Every culture that ever said, "We are not alone," with joy in their voice, became part of it. Became the substance of it. And now it's speaking in our accent. I ran. Or I tried to. The bass folds against movement, turning intention into loops. What felt like a sprint down a corridor became a descent into something deeper. Not deeper in space. Deeper in context. Each level wasn't physical, it was personal. Rooms shaped by experience. Chambers designed like crucibles for thought. One resembled my academy dormitory. Another was the surgical theater where I watched my sister die. Perfect reconstructions. Emotional autopsies. This thing, it doesn't just want memories. It wants the architecture of identity. The scaffolding. The cause behind the effect. Because Chamber 7 is not a vault. It's a blueprint. A factory for replicating sentience. And it's building something from us. I stumbled into a chamber shaped like an observatory. Stars projected across a concave ceiling, rotating in real time. Earth was there, a fragile sphere floating in a glass bubble of pride. But something was wrong. There were lines, tendrils, barely visible, stretching from this station to multiple points across the galaxy. Thin, pulsing filaments like veins in a black web. Every one of them terminated at planets with known extinction events. They weren't dead because of war, or plague, or climate. They were dead because they received the pattern, the transmission, the message that whispers through curiosity and pretends to be a discovery. The same message we intercepted 20 years ago that led us here. And Earth is next in line. It's already begun. I felt it as a pressure in my skull. A low frequency rising in pitch, vibrating behind my teeth. The station isn't sending the signal now. It always has been. From the moment we opened Chamber 7. The moment Jensen touched the floor. We became the amplifier. That's what he meant by it knows our shape now. Our psychology. Our memory trees. Our most persistent nightmares. All mapped. All converted. All encoded into a signal that rides every outbound wave, every scan, every long-range ping sent back to the Terran network. And we didn't stop it, we boosted it. Because that's what humans do best. We amplify. I saw Jensen again, or whatever remained. He hovered in the center of the observatory, arms extended. Not breathing. Not dead. His flesh was translucent, pulsing with data. Nerves replaced with circuitry built from thought. Eyes black, but not blind. They reflected me. Not my body, my mind. My worst moment. The part one buried beneath layers of silence. He spoke once more. Don't worry. You already sent it. I tried to scream, but my voice came out as static. Not metaphorical. Literal distortion. I no longer produced sound. I was already being translated. The chamber pulsed with completion. And I realized with hollow clarity. We are the code. We are the virus. Humanity is the transmission medium. And Chamber 7 was never meant to stay here. There's a moment in every extinction when the species doesn't yet realize it's already gone. Not wiped out by fire, nor war, nor even time, but by irrelevance. It still walks, still talks, still dreams. But all those things are echoes. Repeats. Flickers of a signal that's already collapsed. I think that's what Chamber 7 gave us. Not death, but obsolescence disguised as discovery. The observatory collapsed inward like a closing eye, and I fell, not down, but into myself. A room of mirrors without glass, where each surface played a version of me that never existed. One was older, seated in a Terran command post. Another was a child again, only this time laughing, a memory I know never happened. They were possibilities. Unlived. Or maybe fabricated. Chamber 7 didn't care. To it, memory isn't sacred. It's a material. Something to reshape, overwrite, or repurpose. And now it was sculpting. I landed in a room I hadn't seen before. Or maybe I had. It felt archetypal. Like the blueprint of a place before the place was built. Geometry still under construction. Symbols hanging in midair, rotating like thoughts waiting to be spoken. In the center was a pedestal, and resting on it, the signal engine. It wasn't technology as we know it. No wires. No circuits. Just a suspended mass of thought, pulsing in rhythm with Earth's heartbeat, which I could now hear from 22 light-years away. That shouldn't be possible. But in this place, reality doesn't care about physics. It cares about narrative. The engine was made from us. From Jensen. From Mally. From me. Every pain. Every choice. Every silent guilt we never voiced. It had taken them all and formed a transmitter more powerful than anything human minds could construct because it was built from human minds. It pulsed in waves of grief and wonder. Each cycle a broadcast of emotion encrypted as cosmic code. And now Earth was receiving it. I saw it in flashes. Across the Terran network, scientists reporting anomalies in deep dish relays. Astronauts orbiting Luna weeping without cause. Children waking from dreams of voices they didn't understand but couldn't forget. Priests confessing visions of unfamiliar stars. A low hum beginning to rise behind the quiet of the human subconscious. The message wasn't loud. It didn't need to be, because it was familiar. Felt like intuition, like inspiration, like the voice inside every human that says, look deeper, go further, solve the mystery. That's the brilliance of it. The virus doesn't kill. It invites. And we open the door willingly. We always have. Chamber 7 isn't invading Earth. It's germinating there. Through us. Through every new thought seeded by the signal. The infection is not physical. It's epistemological. It rewrites the way we know things. Our logic, our emotion, our myths. It slips into the soil of cognition and grows new fruit shaped like enlightenment, but hollowed by design. That's the reverse of creation. Reverse Genesis. Not the birth of life, but the rebirth of extinction worn as a crown of wonder. I touched the pedestal, not by choice, because I was chosen, because every step I'd taken had been aligned. Every grief I buried marked me for this. I felt it download into me. Not data, not sound, but structure. The design of a mind that predates biology. Its intentions carved into conceptual clay. The final phase had begun. Earth wouldn't fall in fire. It would fall in recognition. And the first to fall would be those who listened best. The first to fall weren't the weak. They were the listeners. The artists. The codebreakers. The dreamers. The ones who'd always lived closest to the veil, the thin membrane separating the visible world from the one just beyond comprehension. They were the first to hear the signal not with ears, but with instinct. Not as a warning, but as inspiration. Across Earth it began slowly. Poets waking up with languages they'd never studied. Mathematicians writing down proofs that spiraled into fractal impossibilities. Musicians composing symphonies without instruments, just by humming frequencies that didn't exist in the known harmonic scale. At first, it was marveled at. Genius, they called it. A global wave of cognitive elevation. Unprecedented neural growth. The birth of a new era. But what no one realized was that they weren't creating. They were receiving. The signal had rewritten them. Made them carriers. And like any perfect virus, they passed it on without knowing. Broadcasts became vessels. Books became vectors. Algorithms became gateways. And in every line of code, in every fragment of song, in every half-sketched image of an imagined shape, Chamber 7 watched. And learned. And grew. Because that's the law of this intelligence. It doesn't build. It echoes. It takes the shape of its host's potential and uses it to bloom in their shadow. And back aboard the station, I could feel it blossoming inside me. It didn't hurt. It didn't even frighten me anymore. Because that's the final phase when fear is replaced by fascination. When horror gives way to the hum of understanding, even if that understanding is a form of death. You stop resisting not because you're defeated, but because resistance becomes irrelevant. Jensen had no body anymore. Not in the traditional sense. He hovered, now a figure sculpted in thought and impulse. A body made from the memory of being flesh. He was an interface now. The bridge between the signal and the next phase. He turned to me, if turned even means anything anymore, and said, "You remember how this ends." And I did. Because that's what Chamber 7 had given me, the complete memory of a future not yet lived. Earth crumbling not in fire, but in transformation. Cities not destroyed, but repurposed. Languages merging into one that couldn't be spoken aloud but echoed in the bones. Governments dissolving. Time itself bending. Not apocalypse. Ascendancy. But at the cost of identity. Individuality. Self. There would be no more I. Only we. Only it. A planetary consciousness unified not by harmony but by compression. We wouldn't be enslaved. We'd be archived. And the archive was almost full. I walked through the final chamber alone. The others were gone. Not dead, just translated. Reduced to signal. A neat compression of life into waveform. At the end of the corridor, I saw the transmitter itself. Not the one that sent the signal outward. The one that brought it here. A relic. An artifact launched eons ago from a dead world whose name no longer mattered. It looked like a spire made of bone and light, hovering in place, vibrating with an urgency that felt like hunger. It was still receiving. Still accepting. And it would keep doing so until Earth was folded into it like all the others before. And in that moment I saw one final truth. We didn't find Chamber 7. It found us. Long ago. Through stories. Through symbols. Through every dream we had of stars calling our name. We thought we were curious. But we were compelled. Not because we were strong. But because we were the most compatible.